Welcome to my American History Notes, where I discuss my conclusions I've drawn from studying American history, reading trusted historians, trying to look at their primary sources, journals, letters, newspaper accounts, laws, things like that, to try to understand why they reach their conclusions they reach, and then have my own. And I hope you do the same thing. You won't agree with everything I say or anything I say as far as conclusions go, but you need to know about what I'm talking about, the people, the events, the places, the concepts, and even more that I've brought up, to be conversant in American history. And most people look at history and they say, well, that's not relevant to me, my life today. But then they will copy what somebody says on a social media page as being, well, this is the way it was, or this is the way it used to be, or this is what our government's supposed to. You don't even know. You're just copying somebody else. So you need to look and investigate. Uh, I'm a conservative, and to be a conservative, you need to know yourself. You do not need to just simply copy and spit out what somebody you like says. So we're going to begin here, and I'm going to continue talking about causes of the American Revolution. So rather than see how tax money could be raised through colonial assemblies, the Crown and the Parliament sought to continue to raise taxes on them without their consent. Charles Townshend initiated the Townshend Act for taxing Americans in 1767. This assumed that the colonists would not rebel against customs duties as they would against internal taxes. It was believed that if goods were taxed coming into the colonies, as they'd always been, just at a higher rate, that money could be raised for the purposes needed. The fault of all these efforts was that an effort should have been made to get the colonial assemblies to raise taxes rather than to impose new or higher taxes without their input. Paper, glass, paint, and the East India Company's tea were taxed. Samuel Adams of Boston, who did not believe that Parliament had the right to have any authority over the colonies on any subject, was the first promoter of outright revolution in the colonies. He orchestrated dancing around the Liberty Tree, an elm tree near the Boston Common, and hanging unpopular British characters in effigy among its branches. He helped draft a letter by the Massachusetts Assembly to all of the other colonies denouncing the Townshend Acts as the efforts of the Sons of Liberty against the mother country grew. The new Prime Minister, Lord Grafton, used this as an occasion for a showdown. He demanded that the Massachusetts Assembly rescind the letter or resign, both of which they refused to do. This became a rallying point for people like Samuel Adams and Paul Revere, a silversmith who engraved punch bowls and other memorabilia, to keep the fire burning with slogans about liberty and freedom. Up until this time, Benjamin Franklin, who had successfully lobbied the Crown against the Stamp Act, considered himself a proud citizen of the British Empire. The chief contributor to the Sons of Liberty for printing banners and free rum at rallies was John Hancock, a young merchant of Boston. The new commissioners of the customs intended to put him out of business. He was allegedly framed for smuggling Madeira wine aboard his sloop, the Liberty, and was rescued by the Boston mob from the authorities, who had to retreat to a fort within Boston Harbor and had called out the army. The Crown passed the Quartering or Mutiny Act, which required local authorities to be responsible for housing troops and providing them with their daily food and rum ration. When the New York Assembly rebelled at the expense of the rum ration, even though it paid the other expenses, the Crown's representative had them disbanded. When the newly elected Assembly in 1769 went ahead and voted everything that the Crown demanded, rum included, there was rioting and arrest. The rioters used clubs and staves against the British bayonets, and one citizen was killed. In the back country from New Hampshire to South Carolina, in the areas most remote, settlers revolted regularly against British authority. The refusal of the Crown to permit westward expansion was one of the reasons. The War of Regulation in North Carolina that ended with several Baptist rebels called Regulators being hung by the authorities and one drawn and quartered in front of his wife. The Royal Proclamation of 1774 reinforced the idea that the Crown wanted colonies filled from Maine to Florida and not to push westward. Land speculators, or those who wished to make money on the purchase to the rights and the sale of land for settlement west, were angry at this insistence of the Crown to stop westward expansion. It had nothing to do with concern about the Indians and everything to do with the Crown's ability to control the colonies. The Non-Importation Movement of 1768 to 1770 was a voluntary movement initiated by merchants to boycott taxed and untaxed goods from British West Indies and England to put pressure on the British. This agreement was not followed across the board, and while annoying to British commerce, it was not the disaster that was expected. We're going to go on next time to talk a little bit about Lord North and continuing events leading up to the revolution itself. Thank you very much for watching.